The gilded wrought-iron gates of Buckingham Palace are always kept tightly shut. This is not only to protect those of noble blood from the outside world, but more importantly, to lock the ghosts of the past within. Hello, I am the chronicler of the hidden corners of the royal court. Having observed this empire for decades, I once naively believed that I had understood every dirty scheme hidden behind the bright red velvet curtains. I believed that every cruelest, most tearful secret had finally been laid to rest alongside the English rose on the misty island of Althorpe. But we were all wrong. Right now, the 1,000-year-old foundations of the greatest monarchy in the world are cracking. It is not being shaken by a tabloid, an aggressive investigative journalist, or the whiny memoir of a royal who turned his back on his family. This earthquake was triggered by the very steel pillar of the dynasty, Princess Anne, the most loyal and principled woman of all. Everything began on a gray morning at the Gatcombe estate. The rotting plywood of a portrait from the 70s accidentally cracked open. Hidden deep in the core of the sturdy oak frame was a rusted microcassette tape, lying silent for 3 long decades, carrying a verdict from beyond the grave. A chilling recording exposed the most cruel psychological warfare conspiracy, and more horrifyingly, it was spoken by the very woman who now wears the queen consort crown. Today, we will step into the eye of the storm. We will see how Princess Anne faced the heinous crime of her own brother, and witness the moment the future King William collapsed completely upon hearing that cold-blooded voice. Before we open this historical tape, I want to ask you one thing. If this cruel truth is exposed, do you believe the crown will finally fall? Comment number 1. Or will the powerful royal machinery cover it up successfully? Comment number 2. Gatcombe Park Estate on a Tuesday morning passed by without anything special. Unlike the noisy luxury and marble hallways of Buckingham Palace, Gatcombe has always been like this, practical, calm, and completely devoid of the constantly flashing camera lenses of the media. To Princess Anne, this is a safe shelter, a working farm, and not a stage to showcase power. She has always preferred that rustic and direct nature, far away from the PR machine that is always spinning in London. That morning, in Anne's private office, an art restoration expert was carefully cleaning an oil portrait from the 70s. It was a painting of Princess Diana from her youth, an old gift that had been forgotten in a storage corner. Restoration work is inherently boring and repetitive. The worker used a thin, specialized metal spatula to gently remove the oak plywood behind the painting frame to replace it. Then a cracking sound rang out. It was not the sound of rotting wood breaking in two. It was the sound of a hidden mechanical latch just popping open. The worker's hand froze in midair. The wood panel slid out, revealing a tiny rectangular hollow space, carved extremely carefully and intentionally right in the core of the solid wood block. Anne stepped closer, her eyebrows slightly furrowed. She immediately realized this was not a coincidence. She turned to the worker and signaled for him to leave the room. A brief, decisive order, without needing explanation. The worker nodded quickly, gathered his tools, stepped outside, and shut the door tightly. Now, only the princess remained in the room. The air was so quiet that she could hear the rhythm of her own breathing. She reached into that finely carved small hollow and took out an object. It was an old microcassette tape, the tiny type of tape people used for hidden handheld recorders in the 90s. It was neatly wrapped in a yellowed piece of paper, tied on the outside with a thin thread. Anne slowly opened the paper. The familiar blue seal of Kensington Palace was printed at the top of the page. But it was the hurried, handwritten lines in black ink below that stunned her. It was Diana's handwriting. For Anne, because you always choose the truth, no matter how cruel it is. Let the children know when they are old enough to understand. Anne stood still. The public still calls her the steel woman of the royal family. She has never wavered before media crises, family scandals, or even a kidnapping attempt directed at herself. But at this moment, holding the thin piece of paper in her hand, she felt a terrible weight. Why did Diana choose her? Diana knew very well the royal system was always divided into factions and full of leakers. Giving this to Charles's side would be walking into a trap. Giving it to the press would mean it would be immediately suppressed by court injunctions from royal lawyers. Diana chose Anne because she was smart enough to understand that, no matter how cold and principled Anne was, she was the only one who valued the truth and the survival of the crown more than covering up for the individuals wearing it. That message was not a plea for pity. It was a final pragmatic move. Diana handed this ticking time bomb to the only person in the system tough enough not to be bribed or threatened. As Anne's fingers glided over the rough plastic surface of the tape, her mind turned back to the worst years of the 90s. She remembered the years 1995 and 1996 very clearly. At that time, the newspapers were filled every day with articles implying that the Princess of Wales had lost her mind. Buckingham Palace aides constantly whispered to the media that Diana was suffering from severe paranoia. They told reporters the story of how she often crawled under tables, flipped over carpets, and dismantled electrical outlets at Kensington because she stubbornly believed that British intelligence, MI5, was wiretapping her. The whole world, and even the royal system at the time, believed that Diana was falling into an unstable mental state. Most people looked at her with pity mixed with annoyance. But at this very moment, staring at the tape in her hand, Anne realized a truth that would make anyone's skin crawl. Diana was never paranoid. She was completely sane and knew exactly what was happening. The truth is that Diana knew she was being watched, but she did not sit still to play the victim. During those days pushed to the brink, the woman that the press labeled as a weak and unstable person had silently played a deadly game with the entire power machine of England. She had found the tiny wiretapping devices hidden in her bedroom herself. But instead of smashing them or screaming in outrage to the press, she hid them away. And then, she used the system's own weapon to trap them back. She secretly placed that device into Prince Charles's work folder before he left for the weekend. This tape was not a dying wish or a tearful diary page. It was the ultimate insurance policy. It was the only weapon that a mother who was isolated and stripped of all power had created to gain the upper hand, ensuring that no one could take her two sons away from her. Let us pause for a moment and think about this number. 10,500 days. That is correct. For 10,500 days, nearly 30 years, this truth had been buried alive in silence inside an oak frame. Throughout those 30 years, the false story about a weak, paranoid princess continued to be spread and written into history books. Throughout those 30 years, another woman had walked proudly through the Buckingham gates, placed the queen consort crown on her head, and smiled and waved at the crowd on the balcony like a winner. And most cruelly, throughout those 30 years, Prince William and Prince Harry had to grow up, force smiles, comply, and shake hands with those who had planned to destroy their mother without ever knowing that the whole truth had been lying just a few miles away from them, hidden in their own aunt's house. It had been there, waiting patiently for 10,500 days until there was a hand brave enough to pull it out of the darkness. However, that rusted tape did not only contain the cries of a desperate woman. When Princess Anne's finger touched the play button, she did not expect that she was about to open the door to hell, where a symphony of the devil had been arranged many decades ago. The space in the Gatcombe Park office seemed to freeze. Princess Anne sat motionless on the leather armchair, her eyes fixed on the old dictaphone placed on the table. The fingers that were usually only accustomed to holding horse reins firmly now hesitated slightly when pressing the play button. A heavy mechanical click sounded, tearing through the silence of the room. Immediately after, the past did not appear in faded images, but in the ghostly hissing of the magnetic tape that had slept under the dust of time for 3 decades. From the tiny speaker, the time machine suddenly dragged the listener back to 1996, plunging straight into the darkest center of power of the dynasty, the private Highgrove mansion. Upper-class crime rarely begins with loud shouting or threats. It always hides under the guise of luxury and silence. The first sound echoing from the tape was the sound of a solid oak door slamming shut, locking out all prying eyes of the servants. Right after that, a very familiar sound, familiar to the point of being hair-raising to anyone who had ever stepped into royal living rooms, the sound of ice cubes clinking against the sides of expensive crystal glasses. That leisurely sound painted a scene that was perfect to the point of being chilling. They were drinking. They were relaxing, sipping high-end liquid while deciding the fate of a human being. Has the staff in the West Wing retreated yet? A female voice spoke up. It was absolutely not the elegant, trembling, and vulnerable voice of Diana. It was a deep, husky voice, characteristic of long-term smoking habits, carrying a level of authority so high that it was condescending. Anyone living in the United Kingdom could immediately recognize that voice. It was Camilla. They have all left. It is only us. A male voice replied. A bit of hesitation, a flat tone, completely lacking the decisiveness of a leader. It was Charles, the future King of England, hiding in his own mansion to conspire with his mistress. Princess Anne leaned back in her chair, a suffocating feeling rising in her chest. The Devil's Symphony officially began. The thing that made the Iron Princess boil with anger was not the fact that they were having an affair. Infidelity in the royal court is a story that is too old, a secret that everyone implicitly understands. The thing that disgusted her was the coldness to the point of cruelty in the way these two people discussed destroying the spirit of the sister-in-law who had once called her sister. The current media strategy is failing. Camilla's voice rang out, sharp and rhythmic, like a general reviewing troops. The public still pities her. We need to be more aggressive if we want to completely shatter her mind before the divorce is finalized. They did not discuss property division or child custody. They were outlining a character assassination campaign. Camilla continued to outline the most ruthless move, without a moment's hesitation, must dig deeper into her bulimia. Leak private therapy sessions out to the journalists. Once the public believes that she has completely lost her mind and no longer has the ability to control herself, your mother will have no choice but to force a divorce and strip her of the HRH title completely. Sitting in the empty room, Anne clenched her hands. She knew very well where Diana's eating disorder came from. It sprouted from Charles's own coldness, from the suffocating pressure of royal principles. And now, the very people who had dug that wound deeper were using it as a weapon to stab the rest of her life. They wanted to strip away her honor, so that Diana would walk out of the palace not as a victim, but as a madwoman who deserved to be cast aside. Amidst those cold-blooded calculations, the reaction of Prince Charles truly exposed the cowardly nature of a man destined to rule the kingdom. If we push her too hard, the consequences will fall on William and Harry, Charles replied hesitantly, his voice trembling slightly. The children are very attached to their mother. I cannot let my sons be caught in the crossfire of a smear campaign. A half-hearted, pathetic, and hollow excuse. He did not extinguish the plot to protect the wife who had given him 2 children. He did not dare to look his mistress in the eye and roar that she was going too far. Charles only muttered a few perfunctory words, trying to keep his own hands looking clean while allowing others to mold the dirty plan. His consenting silence was the sharpest weapon pinned directly into Diana's heart. But Camilla did not care about that weakness. She launched the decisive strike, a fatal blow that far exceeded all boundaries of the war within the palace. The woman's voice dropped into a threatening whisper, sounding like venom dripping into the air. "The children will get used to it, Charles. But as long as she has royal bodyguards by her side, she remains untouchable. They are her human shields." Another clink of ice hitting the side of a crystal glass. Very faint, but echoing like a death knell. "You must convince Mother to withdraw her entire security detail. Immediately. Just throw her out on the streets with the wolves. Without the protection of the crown, the paparazzi will suffocate her." The wolves that Camilla referred to were not just a few stray photographers. Anne knew that all too well. It was a bloodthirsty army, with more than 40 heavy-duty paparazzi lenses always lurking, shouting, and hunting around Diana's car every day and every night. It was a brutal street hunt where the prey was a lonely mother who no longer had any shield protecting her. "She will go crazy and collapse within 1 year," Camilla concluded coldly. 1 year? That was the shelf life she determined for Diana. Stripping away the royal bodyguards was not merely a matter of cutting privileges. It was a death sentence signed in advance, a play where the murderer only had to open the cage door for the beasts to rush in and tear the victim apart, then stand back and watch with hands that were completely guiltless. Those cold-blooded words hissed in the quiet space of Gatcombe Park. Standing before undeniable evidence of the cruelty of her brother and sister-in-law, the woman dubbed the steel pillar of the royal family had to face the most cruel crossroads of her life. When the magnetic tape stopped turning, returning the original silence to the room at the Gatcombe estate, Princess Anne did not cry. There were no tragic tears or broken sobs. She was the daughter of Queen Elizabeth II, a woman tempered by steel and duty, who had spent her entire life learning how to never show weakness. But beneath that extremely calm exterior, a terrible storm was tearing at her heart. Sitting alone between 4 walls, Anne realized she was holding a time bomb with enough explosive power to flatten the throne of the House of Windsor. Standing before this undeniable evidence, she was pushed into the most cruel crossroads that a royal family member had ever faced. The choice between loyalty to her own blood brother or protecting the integrity of the very crown that her family had sworn to preserve. Let us look at the naked truth. Charles is her brother. Their entire childhood was associated with the cold hallways of Buckingham, where they could only rely on each other to survive the suffocating royal rules. Releasing this tape meant that Anne was driving the final nail into Charles's political coffin by herself, exposing him not just as a terrible husband, but as a cold-blooded accomplice in a plot to destroy a mother. That was an act of treason. But on the other hand, what would that blind loyalty cost? If she burned this tape, if she buried it back in the darkness, she would become an accomplice, protecting a dynasty built on lies and the blood of an innocent woman. Anne was a firm believer in the sanctity of the monarchy. To her, the crown was not a piece of jewelry to show off, but a symbol of honor, responsibility, and respectability. A crown, tainted by such cruel, dirty schemes, is no longer a crown. It is just a cheap play, and Anne refused to let her family's history rot from within. The decision was made. The lie must be ended. But how? Anyone else in this position would immediately pick up the phone, call a major newspaper like the Times or the BBC to leak the tape. But not Anne. She understood too well how this system operates. She knew very well the terror of the PR guillotine inside Buckingham Palace. If she gave the tape to the press, the giant team of royal lawyers would immediately file super injunctions with the High Court to block publication in less than 1 hour. Charles's crisis management experts would blame the technology. They would go on national television networks and loudly declare this was just a sophisticated deepfake product created by artificial intelligence to smear the Queen Consort. They would crush the credibility of anyone who dared to publish it, and the truth would once again be stifled under the power of the machinery. Anne could not let them play the damage control game. She could not give them a chance to counterattack. To kill a monster, you cannot negotiate with it. You must stab it directly in the heart before it realizes what is happening. And so, the royal princess decided to use her own unparalleled privileges to carry out an overthrow from within. She did not need the press, did not need editors, and did not need anyone's permission. As a senior member of the royal family, Anne had access to secure satellite communication systems that the palace PR department could not touch. She ordered the establishment of an encrypted transmission line broadcasting directly from the Gatcombe estate, connecting straight to decentralized global server networks. No lawyer could sue an anonymous server. No British court order could be imposed on the entire world internet. As night began to fall over the Gatcombe estate, the air in Anne's office was deathly quiet. The broadcasting equipment was ready. Only one button press, and there was no way back. The irony of history had never appeared so clearly and cruelly. Think about this number. The British monarchy had existed for more than 1,200 years, overcoming countless bloody wars, revolutions, and even pandemics that swept through Europe. And yet, the fate of an entire 1,000-year empire was compressed and decided in just 24 short hours by the decision of exactly one woman, a single princess who dared to stand up and use the truth to cleanse the crown, even knowing it would incinerate her own family. Anne took a deep breath, her gaze resolute and cold like a sword that had just been pulled from its scabbard. She reached for the control panel. When the broadcast button was pressed, there was no force on earth that could stop the truth from spreading. In just an instant, the digital earthquake struck London, and the first person to endure that terrible destruction, tragically, was the future King of England. When the encrypted signal from Gatcombe Park was pushed to global decentralized servers, it did not create a small ripple on the water. It created a massive tsunami that swept away everything in its path. You must understand how the world works today. Information no longer moves sluggishly through morning printed newspapers or carefully censored night news broadcasts. It explodes on the phone screens of billions of people in the blink of an eye. Within the first 3 minutes from the moment Camilla's husky, cold voice rang out from the rusted tape, the number of views on the live stream hit 50 million. 50 million people across all time zones, from noisy cafes in New York to crowded subways in Tokyo, simultaneously stopped all activities. Social networks collapsed locally under the weight of the massive traffic. Veteran editors at CNN, BBC, and Sky News almost stuttered on live television, their eyes wide with shock as they had to broadcast the chilling threats of the incumbent queen consort over and over again. There was no prior warning. There was no filter. The truth, naked and cruel, was exposed in broad daylight. And at the center of the storm, Buckingham Palace. The biggest, most sophisticated, and most ruthless PR machine in the world, which had once whitewashed countless royal scandals, now fell into a state of total freeze. Imagine the scene inside those solid marble walls. Top-tier legal teams and the most experienced crisis management experts in London ran back and forth in the hallways with pale faces. They could not file an injunction with the court because the broadcast server was completely anonymous and out of reach of British law. They could not blame deepfake technology because the biometric signature of the audio was too perfect. They were completely neutralized. King Charles must have turned to stone in his chair, while Camilla watched the castle of lies that she had painstakingly built for 3 decades crumbling into dust. No denial statement was drafted. There was only one single, weak, desperate, and pathetic response, unprecedented in the history of the monarchy, sent to international news agencies. No comment. Those 2 short words, tragically, were the clearest and most resounding confession of all. But while the whole world was burning in rage, the epicenter of the true pain, the bloodiest and most cruel tragedy, was not happening on the news. It was happening on an encrypted satellite phone line in Princess Anne's office. The top-secret phone on the table rang. It was not a normal ring, but a jarring, sharp sound, signaling a call from the internal communication system of the highest-ranking members. On the screen, a royal lock code blinked. It was Prince William. Let us pause here for a moment. Put yourself in the position of this man. William was not only the Prince of Wales, not only the heir to the throne. At his very core, he was still a 15-year-old boy who had once walked with his head bowed behind his mother's lead-lined coffin under the scrutiny of billions of people. For decades, he had been gaslighted by his family to believe that his mother was a weak, unstable woman who had brought the tragedy upon herself. Worse, because of his duty to the throne, he had to swallow his anger. He learned how to smile for the cameras, learned how to concede, and even protect the woman who had replaced his mother. He had invited her to the wedding. He had let her hold his children. He had to call her queen consort. Princess Anne picked up the phone. There was no greeting. There were no formal titles. From the other end of the line, the voice of the future King of England shattered into pieces. "Anne," William sobbed. His breathing was intermittent, choked, and in extreme panic. The authoritative shell of the heir was gone, leaving only the deeply wounded soul of a son who had just had his heart ripped out. "Tell me, please tell me the forensic expert was wrong. Tell me that woman did not utter those words. How can you soothe a wound that has rotted from the marrow?" Anne closed her eyes. Even a steel woman like her felt her chest constricted by the cruelty of fate. "I am sorry, William," Anne said, her words falling softly but sharp as a razor blade, severing all the final vain hopes of her nephew. "It is the truth. It is the original analog tape. The biometrics match perfectly. Your mother recorded it herself from a device hidden in your father's briefcase." At that very moment, Prince William's worldview collapsed completely. Imagine the extreme horror clawing at his mind. This pain is not just about being deprived of his mother once again. It is the most cruel level of betrayal a human can endure. The truth struck him hard. He had shaken hands, raised glasses in celebration, and shared a roof with the very chief architect who had designed the death sentence for his own mother. The woman he had been forced to respect was, in reality, a cold-blooded predator. Every polite smile, every caring look from Camilla over the past 30 years now appeared in William's mind like blood-stained knives. He had eaten at the table with the devil. He had served his mother's enemy. That encrypted call was very brief. It lasted only exactly 45 seconds. But in those 45 short seconds, it officially shattered the internal workings of a dynasty, incinerating every illusion about a united royal family. A harsh beeping sound rang out from the phone speaker, leaving Princess Anne in solitary silence. On the other end of the line, William had hung up, sinking into an abyss of irredeemable truth. The deathly silence that engulfed Buckingham Palace afterward was the clearest evidence of a dying empire. While the whole world was frantically tearing each other apart for the truth, Princess Anne understood that she had one final task to complete for the soul of her sister-in-law to truly rest in peace. While the digital world out there was burning, the space inside the office at Gatcombe Park Estate sank into an eerie stillness. The screen of the encrypted satellite phone on the oak table continued to flash cold lights, signaling urgent calls from heads of state, from the Prime Minister's office, and, of course, from the advisory team in extreme panic at Buckingham Palace. But Princess Anne had turned off the ringer long ago. She brushed aside all the chaos of a power machine that was struggling, her eyes focused solely on the tiny object lying silent in front of her, the rusted microcassette tape. The world out there now possessed a digital copy of the truth. The lie had been exposed. But to Anne, the physical tape lying on the table was not merely legal evidence or an archival record. It was a relic. It was the desperate heartbeat, the final cry of a mother who had been pushed to the edge. And now, when the mission to expose the darkness had been completed, this blood-stained relic needed a final resting place. Any diligent royal official would advise her to seal the tape, place it in a red velvet-lined box, and surrender it to the absolute security steel vault beneath Windsor Castle. That is where the British royal family keeps priceless diamond-studded crowns, ancient treaties, and family secrets that must never see the light of day. But Anne only shook her head. She knew those royal underground vaults too well. They were cold, suffocating, and cruel, just like the people operating this monarchical machine. Diana had spent all her most beautiful years of youth imprisoned within those gilded walls. She had lived under surveillance, in isolation, suffocated by the invisible rules of a luxurious prison. Anne would absolutely not let the final remnant of Diana be deprived and imprisoned once again in the steel vault of those who had pushed her to the grave. This tape did not belong to the dynasty. It belonged to freedom. Princess Anne slowly stood up. She put on a dark, thick, and simple wool coat, the type of clothing she often wore when taking care of her horses herself, not the formal attire covered in glittering medals to perform before the public. Calling no bodyguards, waking no servants, she took the tape that had been carefully wrapped in paper bearing the Kensington Palace crest, then quietly pushed the side door of the mansion and stepped out into the night. The night at Gatcombe Park Estate carried a sacred stillness. The late autumn wind whistled through the misty hills, carrying the bone-chilling cold of the English countryside. The sound of gravel crunching under Anne's shoes was the only sound breaking the quiet night. She left behind the dim lights of the mansion, walking deeper and deeper into the dark forest, where ancient tree canopies intertwined like a giant dome shielding the earth. There were no flashing camera lenses, no bloodthirsty prying eyes of the paparazzi. Only her, the darkness, and the truth. Her destination lay in the deepest, most pristine area of Gatcombe. It was a giant ancient oak tree. The authoritative princess stopped, looking up at the majestic silhouette of the tree standing in the darkness. This number will make you reflect. This oak tree is 300 years old. It had taken root here from before America won its independence, from before the first steam engines completely changed the face of the world. Unlike frivolous royal people, this tree had silently witnessed countless kings ascend the throne and pass away, empires prosper and decline into ashes. It was sturdy, silent, and eternal. And tonight, this 300-year-old oak tree would become the only historical witness to the final piece of the English rose. Without needing gold-plated shovels or fake, cumbersome royal rituals, Anne knelt down on the damp forest floor. A princess of the United Kingdom, who carried within her the most noble royal blood, now used her own bare hands to dig up each handful of soil, excavating a deep hollow right next to the taproot of the oak tree. The dark, cold, yet life-breathing humus soil seeped into her fingernails. This contrast was intense and heart-wrenching. Between the decaying luxury of the palace and the pure simplicity of nature, between a lying empire that was collapsing and the nurturing arms of Mother Earth, she carefully placed the microcassette tape deep into the dark hollow. The paper bearing the Kensington Palace seal had faded, looking fragile like a farewell greeting closing a chapter of history full of blood and tears. She knelt silently there, letting the cold wind blow through her graying hair. No flashy eulogy was read, nor did any religious choir echo. The final words spoken were only a silent whisper between two women who had once been trapped in the same cruel machine but chose for themselves two completely different ways out. "You did well, Diana," Anne whispered into the mist, her voice as thin as a sigh, drifting away with the rustling of the leaves. No one can force you to be silent anymore. You are truly free. Rest now." The princess's mud-stained hand slowly swept the humus layer, filling the small hollow, burying that resentment-filled metal block forever deep in the nurturing arms of the 300-year-old roots. She pressed the ground down tightly, flattening all traces. There would never be a marble tombstone erected here. There would be no map guiding the curious public to find it. This fierce battle had finally ended, and Diana had gained a small, sacred secret corner of her own, forever away from the exploitation of the media and the control of the crown. The princess stood up, brushed the black soil off the knees of her worn wool coat, then quietly turned and walked away toward the faint lights of the mansion. The cold soil covering the rusted tape was also the moment the dark velvet curtain of royal history was drawn, leaving behind a blood-stained legacy that could never be washed away. The battle behind the gilded iron gates of Buckingham Palace had now changed its nature forever. It was no longer determined by flashy titles, royal decrees, or the supreme power handed down from centuries ago. The entire foundation of the current monarchy was burning fiercely in the digital fire, lit by the indignation of millions of people globally. The bitterest thing about history is that the most cruel secret of the British royal family was exposed not by an opposing enemy or ruthless journalists. It was torn open by the very person carrying the most loyal and principled royal blood, Princess Anne. Through this irreversible decision, Anne proved a cruel truth of power that no monarch wants to admit. The bloodiest secrets buried deepest never truly disappear. They just lie patiently in the darkness, waiting for the day to return to demand the blood debt in full. Her courageous act was not just a belated atonement for Princess Diana. It was the cold, decisive surgical knife, cutting away the rotting pus of lies that had taken root deep in the throne. As for Prince William, the future King of England, the next chapter of his life would be an endless threnody. He must ascend the throne, bearing on his shoulders a crown heavy with tragedy, and be forced to rule the very institution that had cruelly murdered his own birth mother. People often comfort themselves with the cliched saying that time heals all wounds. But believe me, inside the cold granite hallways of the royal palace, time does not heal anything. It only silently makes those wounds more toxic. The English rose had lain deep beneath the cold earth, silent for 3 long decades. But now, her desperate cry for help, thanks to the courage of Princess Anne, had turned into resounding thunder. That storm would forever haunt those sitting haughtily on the throne of power, forever reminding them that no shell can hide a crime. Thank you for joining me in exploring the haunting hidden corners of the royal court today. One morning, inside the management offices of the royal estates, staff members opened the familiar contract register, where the same names had appeared for many years and almost never changed. But this time, one detail made several people pause for a few seconds. One name had disappeared: Annabel Elliot. The woman who had worked with the royal estates for more than 20 years, and who is also the sister of Queen Camilla, suddenly no longer appeared on the list of contracts. There was no press release. There was no official explanation. There was simply a quiet disappearance. According to several sources familiar with the operations of the Duchy of Cornwall, this change occurred during a review of business contracts after Prince William took over management of the estate. The Duchy of Cornwall is one of the most important financial resources of the heir to the throne. For that reason, every decision involving outside contracts is seen as a signal of how the Prince of Wales intends to shape his own system of power and finance. For many years, Annabel Elliot was considered a familiar figure in the network that provided interior design services for properties belonging to the duchy. She is a respected designer within the British upper class and has taken part in numerous decoration projects at historic estates. However, the fact that she is also the sister of Queen Camilla has always led observers to question the boundary between family relationships and business interests inside the royal system. As William and Catherine increasingly show their intention to build a more modern and transparent image for the monarchy, relationships of this kind have begun to face renewed scrutiny. Some analysts believe the decision to end the contract with Annabel Elliot is simply a step meant to separate personal interests from the financial operations of the estate. Yet behind the scenes of the royal world, many people see another layer of meaning. Power is quietly shifting, and that shift appears to be moving toward greater concentration around William and Catherine. So is this an inevitable step in the modernization of the monarchy? Or a personal message that William wants to send to those who once stood close to the old center of power? If you support the decisiveness of William, comment with the number 1. If you feel sympathy for the declining position of Camilla, leave the number 2. To understand why Prince William is able to make such strong decisions regarding contracts and personnel within the royal business network, it is necessary to turn the clock back to a moment that completely changed the structure of power in the United Kingdom. That moment was September 8, 2022, when Queen Elizabeth II died at Balmoral Castle after more than 70 years on the throne. This event immediately triggered a chain of power transitions that the public rarely noticed in full. Charles became king. Camilla became queen. Yet, while public attention focused on the coronation and the ceremonies of the state, another important transformation occurred almost at the same time. Prince William officially became the Duke of Cornwall and took control of the entire Duchy of Cornwall, one of the most powerful economic assets of the British royal family. According to public financial records, the Duchy of Cornwall is valued at approximately $1.2 billion United States dollars. It is not simply a symbolic estate, but a genuine empire of land and agriculture. The duchy owns more than 135,000 acres of land spread across several regions of England, including farms, forests, commercial properties, historic villages, and modern housing developments. What makes the Duchy of Cornwall unique is not only its scale, but also its legal structure. The estate was established in the 14th century to provide an independent source of income for the heir to the throne. This means that all profits from the duchy do not belong to the national budget and are not under the direct control of the monarch. The primary manager and beneficiary is the Prince of Wales. Recent financial reports show that the Duchy of Cornwall generated annual revenue of about 30 million United States dollars in the year 2025. This income comes from several sources: agricultural land leases, real estate development, commercial and tourism projects. This stable stream of money has led many analysts to describe the duchy as a private golden reserve for the heir to the throne. Before becoming king, Charles controlled the Duchy of Cornwall for several decades and used this income to finance the operations of the Prince of Wales' office, while also supporting part of the expenses of other family members. But when Charles ascended the throne, the entire financial system immediately passed into the hands of William. This was not merely a ceremonial transition. It meant that William moved from being a senior royal figure to becoming the direct manager of a vast economic asset. Some observers believe this moment marked the true maturation of William's power within the royal system. For many years, he had often been viewed as a symbolic representative of the younger generation and the future of the monarchy. But with the Duchy of Cornwall in his hands, his role changed dramatically. William does not only represent the image of the monarchy, he also controls one of the most important financial centers of the House of Windsor. It is from this economic foundation of power that recent decisions have begun to emerge. When an individual or a company wants to work with estates belonging to the Duchy of Cornwall, they must pass through a management system overseen by William. That includes reviewing old contracts, long-standing partners, and business relationships that have existed for many years. For that reason, when the name of Annabel Elliot suddenly disappeared from contracts connected to the duchy, many observers did not treat it as an isolated event. They saw it as a signal that William has begun using his new financial authority to reshape the entire network surrounding the duchy. And when those changes begin to affect figures connected to the family of Camilla, the story immediately becomes far more sensitive. Money always comes with control. In the case of the Duchy of Cornwall, that control is not limited to land management or financial budgets, but also appears clearly in decisions about personnel and business contracts. At this point, many observers believe Prince William has started to introduce the first changes since taking over the duchy. Changes that some people describe as a process of cleaning up the financial legacy left behind from the era of King Charles. Among the names attracting the greatest attention, Annabel Elliott quickly became the central focus. She is not only a well-known interior designer within the British upper class, but also the biological sister of Queen Camilla. For many years, this family connection meant that her role within the Duchy of Cornwall was always viewed with particular interest by the press and by royal observers. Financial records show that Annabel Elliott began participating in interior design projects for the Duchy of Cornwall around the year 2005. Her work involved decorating and renovating many properties belonging to the duchy, from farmhouses to historic residences that were rented out or used for official hospitality. According to reports published over many years, the fees she received ranged from about £19,000 to £82,000 each year, depending on the scale of the project. For many people inside royal circles, inviting a familiar designer to participate in repeated projects is not unusual. Historic estates often prefer to work with specialists who already understand architectural characteristics and conservation procedures. However, in the case of Annabel Elliott, the family connection always made the story more sensitive. During the years when Charles was still Prince of Wales, the network of business partners connected to the Duchy of Cornwall was largely built on long-standing relationships. Many of those partners were close friends, advisors, or individuals with direct connections to the family. This system functioned relatively smoothly for several decades, yet it was also frequently criticized for lacking a clear separation between personal relationships and business activity. When William took control of the Duchy of Cornwall in the year 2022, one of his first steps was to review all existing contracts. This is a common process when a new leader takes over a large organization. However, within the context of growing public pressure on the British monarchy to demonstrate financial transparency, the review quickly attracted the attention of the media. Within a short time after the evaluation process began, the name Annabel Elliott no longer appeared on the list of service providers for the Duchy of Cornwall. There was no official statement explaining the decision. Yet, for many royal analysts, the change carried a clear meaning. William had chosen to end a business relationship that had lasted nearly 2 decades. This change did not occur in isolation. At the same time that several old contracts were ending, the Duchy of Cornwall also began working with new partners. Some sources report that several interior projects and property development plans were later assigned to designers and contractors who have closer ties to the social circle of William and Catherine. Among them are close family friends and even godparents of their children. For supporters of William, this step appears entirely reasonable. They argue that any leader who takes over a major organization will naturally want to work with associates whom he trusts. Moreover, changing business partners is also viewed as a way to introduce new ideas into the management and development of the estates. However, for observers who closely follow royal affairs, the change carries another layer of meaning. Annabel Elliott is not only a designer, she also represents the presence of Camilla's family within the financial network that once revolved around the Duchy of Cornwall. When her name disappeared from the list of contracts, many people interpreted it as a signal that the influence of this branch of the family within the duchy properties may be coming to an end. Some commentators have even described the decision as a symbolic message. For many years, the stories surrounding the relationship between Charles, Camilla, and Princess Diana has left a deep mark in public memory. William, as the eldest son of Diana, is often viewed as the person who carries the emotional legacy of that turbulent period. For that reason, when he began restructuring the business network of the Duchy of Cornwall. Every change involving people close to Camilla was quickly examined through both political and personal lenses. William has never publicly connected his management decisions with stories from the past. Yet the timing of these developments has still led many observers to raise questions. Is this simply a normal reform aimed at modernizing the management system of the duchy? Or is it a sign that the next generation of the royal family is gradually drawing a clear boundary with older networks of influence? What is certain is that the Duchy of Cornwall is now entering a new phase under the leadership of William. Contracts are being reviewed, partners are changing, and during that process, names once connected to the old system may gradually leave the stage. The case of Annabel Elliot therefore becomes the clearest example of this transition. There was no official announcement. There was no public controversy. There was simply a name disappearing from the list of contracts after nearly 20 years. Yet, inside the discreet world of the British monarchy, quiet changes like this often speak the loudest. But the Duchy of Cornwall is only the beginning of the story about financial power within the royal family. For many observers, the real concern for Queen Camilla does not lie in business contracts in Cornwall, but in two locations with far deeper symbolic meaning. Those places are Sandringham and Balmoral, two estates she has known for many years, yet which, in reality, do not belong to her. To understand why this matters, it is first necessary to distinguish the structure of royal property in Britain. Much of the public assumes that all palaces and castles belong to the king. In reality, the property system of the British monarchy is far more complex. Some estates belong to the Crown Estate, which is public property managed on behalf of the nation. These properties are not the personal possessions of the monarch and cannot be sold or passed to heirs according to personal wishes. Sandringham and Balmoral belong to a completely different category. They are private properties of the royal family, passed down through generations, just like inherited estates in aristocratic families. This means that ultimate control over these two estates lies with the head of the House of Windsor and is then transferred directly to the next successor. Sandringham is located in the county of Norfolk and has long been known as the place where the royal family gathers for their traditional Christmas holidays. It is also closely connected to many private moments of the Windsor family throughout the 20th century. Balmoral, located in the Scottish Highlands, carries an even deeper personal meaning. The vast estate was where Queen Elizabeth II spent much of her time resting, and it is also the place where she died in the year 2022. According to land records, Balmoral covers about 53,680 acres of land. It is one of the largest private estates owned by the British royal family. In addition to the main castle, the property includes forests, rivers, farms, and several smaller houses used for staff and guests. The exact financial value of the estate is difficult to determine. Yet many property experts believe it belongs among the most valuable private assets of the House of Windsor. When Queen Elizabeth II died, both Sandringham and Balmoral were transferred to King Charles as part of his personal inheritance. This means Charles became the direct owner of both estates, completely separate from public properties such as Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle. However, this inheritance structure also leads to another reality. When Charles dies in the future, ownership of Sandringham and Balmoral will pass to the next monarch. In that scenario, the absolute owner of the entire estate of more than 53,000 acres at Balmoral will be Prince William. For many people within royal circles, this detail carries significant meaning for the future position of Queen Camilla in the years ahead. As the wife of the monarch, she currently has the right to access and use these estates just like other senior members of the family. But when Charles is no longer there, her legal position will change considerably. In the history of the British monarchy, widows of kings are usually provided with their own residence and continue to hold a certain role in royal life. However, access to the personal properties of the successor is not always guaranteed automatically. Everything depends on the decision of the new monarch and on internal agreements within the family. This leads to a rather sensitive reality. In the future, William will hold direct control over Sandringham and Balmoral. That control includes not only ownership of the land, but also the authority to decide who can use the properties inside the estates. At what time? And for what purpose? For Camilla, this means that the privileged access she currently enjoys may change. While Charles remains on the throne, her presence at Sandringham or Balmoral is completely natural. But when the structure of power shifts, every decision concerning the use of those estates will be in William's hands. Royal observers believe this is precisely why small changes within the management networks and personnel connected to the estates are becoming more noticeable. When someone like Annabel Elliot, the sister of Camilla, no longer appears in contracts connected to the Duchy of Cornwall, many people begin to ask whether that reduction of influence could eventually extend to other estates in the future. Some sources close to royal social circles even suggest that William and Catherine are gradually building their own management system for the assets they will control for many decades ahead. If that is true, then the personnel decisions being made today may only be the first steps in a much larger restructuring process. Within that context, the position of Camilla becomes rather unique. She remains queen while Charles is alive and continues to play an important role in official activities. But in the long term, her future will be closely connected to the decisions of the next generation. This does not mean Camilla will be removed from royal life, but it does show that real power is slowly shifting. As time passes, and the private assets of the House of Windsor gradually move into the hands of William, he will become the person holding the key that determines who can continue to consider places like Sandringham and Balmoral as home. And in the royal world, control of a home is sometimes the clearest symbol of power. Many people who follow the recent developments inside the British royal family have begun asking an important question. Why does Prince William appear so firm in restructuring financial and personnel networks that have existed for many decades? Why were long-standing contracts ended relatively quickly after he took control of the Duchy of Cornwall? For many analysts, the answer does not lie only in governance or financial transparency. It also lies in memories that shaped an entire generation of the House of Windsor. Memories that began nearly 30 years ago, when the marriage between Prince Charles and Princess Diana collapsed in public before the entire world. In the early 1990s, reports about the extramarital relationship between Charles and Camilla gradually became a major subject in the British press. Leaked telephone recordings, investigative newspaper reports, and television interviews turned the family crisis into one of the largest scandals in the modern history of the monarchy. For the public, it was a controversial romantic story. But for two young boys inside the Windsor family at that time, Prince William and Prince Harry, it was a deeply turbulent period in their own lives. William was only 15 years old then. Old enough to understand what was happening, but still far too young to escape the emotional impact of a family crisis. Royal biographers say William witnessed many tense moments as his parents gradually separated. Princess Diana frequently became the focus of the media during that time, receiving enormous sympathy from the public while also facing intense pressure from disputes within the royal household. Images of Diana appearing across the international press during those years left a deep mark on the memory of an entire generation of British people, including her own sons. After Diana died in the year 1997, public emotion toward her became even stronger. Many people viewed her as a symbol of vulnerability within a royal system, often seen as too rigid. For many years afterward, Diana's name remained closely linked to the story of the relationship between Charles and Camilla. Within that context, William grew up carrying a very particular emotional legacy. He was both the future heir of the monarchy and the son of the woman the public often viewed as the victim in one of the most famous family crises of the 20th century. However, those who followed William's development noticed that he rarely showed any open confrontation regarding the past. When Charles and Camilla officially married in the year 2005, both William and Harry attended the ceremony. Their presence at that time was widely interpreted as a signal that the family was trying to close a deeply controversial chapter. In the years that followed, William also maintained a very cautious tone in his public statements. He focused on charitable work, building the image of a new generation of the monarchy, and avoided participating in debates about the past relationship of his father. This approach gradually helped him become one of the most trusted members of the British royal family in the eyes of the public. However, silence does not mean memory disappears. Some commentators believe that when William began to hold real financial authority through the Duchy of Cornwall, he chose a very different method to express his position. Instead of creating direct confrontation, he focused on restructuring the economic system surrounding the heir to the throne. For many decades under Charles, the Duchy of Cornwall was not only a financial resource but also the center of a network of partners, advisors, and close associates. Some individuals within that network had social or family connections with Camilla. This was not necessarily unusual within the British aristocracy, where personal relationships often play an important role in business. But when William took over the duchy, he appeared determined to establish a clearer boundary. Contracts were reviewed. Some long-standing partners no longer continued working with the duchy. Others were replaced by new specialists or associates from the social circle of William and Catherine. In the view of many analysts, this is a very skillful strategy. William does not need to publicly criticize anyone. He also does not create any direct confrontation within the family. Yet, by controlling the financial resources of the heir to the throne, he can reshape the entire economic ecosystem surrounding that position. For those who once benefited from the old network, the change means their influence gradually declines over time. For William, it is a way to confirm that the financial resources of the Duchy of Cornwall will serve the vision of the next generation, rather than continue supporting relationship structures formed in the past. Some commentators describe this approach as strategic independence. William does not disrupt the stability of the monarchy through personal conflict. Instead, he builds a new system in which financial power is more tightly controlled and less dependent on family connections. Within that context, decisions such as ending the contract with Annabel Elliot are interpreted in different ways. For some observers, it is simply administrative reform. For others, it carries symbolic meaning. An era in which the Duchy of Cornwall operated through familiar networks is gradually coming to an end. In its place emerges a new structure where Prince William appears, determined to show that the financial resources of the heir to the throne will no longer be used to sustain any family ecosystem beyond his own vision. In many analyses of the shifting balance of power within the British royal family, attention often focuses on Prince William. Yet, a closer look at how decisions are forming around the Duchy of Cornwall and the private assets of the House of Windsor reveals another figure who is gradually emerging with significant influence. That figure is Princess Catherine. In the careful yet unmistakable generational transition now unfolding, Catherine is not simply standing beside William during public ceremonies. Several sources familiar with the work of the Prince of Wales report that she is becoming increasingly involved in strategic discussions concerning asset management, charitable initiatives, and the long-term image of the monarchy. This development becomes particularly notable when examining how the Duchy of Cornwall is being operated after William assumed control. The duchy is not only the most important financial source for the heir to the throne, it is also the foundation supporting the entire operation of the Prince and Princess of Wales for many decades ahead. Every decision involving investment, property development, or business partnership has a direct impact on how the next generation of the monarchy will function. According to royal observers, Catherine has become an inseparable part of this decision-making process. Over many years, she has built the image of a careful and discreet member of the royal family, someone who focuses strongly on long-term issues such as public health, early childhood education, and social development. This strategic approach leads many observers to believe that Catherine is not only providing support, but also acting as a true partner in shaping William's direction. Some commentators suggest that the couple is building a new leadership model for the British monarchy. Instead of relying on traditional social networks, they tend to choose advisors and collaborators based on professional expertise and personal trust. This approach helps create a management structure that is more flexible and less influenced by complicated family connections. The growing role of Catherine can also be seen in another symbolic sphere of royal life. That sphere is royal jewelry. Within the traditional system of the House of Windsor, many valuable pieces of jewelry are considered symbols of power and continuity within the monarchy. They are often passed down to future queens or loaned for important official occasions. One of the most famous pieces in this category is the tiara known as Girls of Great Britain and Ireland. It is one of the most iconic crowns of the British royal family and was worn by Queen Elizabeth II during many important occasions. After her death, the tiara has continued to appear on the head of Queen Camilla during several official events. However, within royal tradition, many experts believe that symbolic jewels of this kind will eventually pass to the next generation of queens. This means that in the future, when William becomes king, Catherine will most likely become the true heir to these powerful symbols. For that reason, the use of certain royal jewels by Camilla today is often viewed as temporary during a transitional period. Royal historians note that in the past, famous tiaras often moved from one generation to another, depending on the position of the head of the monarchy. This symbolic transfer is one reason why Catherine's role is receiving increasing attention. She is not only the wife of the heir to the throne, she is also widely seen as the future Queen of Britain, the woman who will inherit both the material legacy and the symbolic heritage of the Windsor dynasty. Within that context, the changes taking place inside the financial and management system of the Duchy of Cornwall can also be viewed from a long-term perspective. William and Catherine appear to be building a new foundation for the reign they will lead in the future. Some commentators observe that the couple tends to establish a more streamlined structure of power. Old networks of influence are gradually being replaced by a new system of collaborators. Within that system, individuals with direct connections to William and Catherine occupy central roles, while relationships once associated with previous generations may gradually lose influence. This does not mean that other members of the royal family will be removed from shared royal life, but it does reveal a clear reality. As the new generation prepares to rise to the highest position of the monarchy, they also seek to build a foundation of power that reflects their own vision and priorities. In that broader picture, Catherine is no longer seen merely as a symbol of elegance or stability. She is gradually becoming an important part of the emerging power structure within the British royal family. Together with William, she represents a future reign that many observers believe will place greater emphasis on transparency, financial discipline, and stricter oversight of the networks of influence surrounding the throne. If current trends continue, Catherine's role within that system may become even clearer as time passes. As William moves closer to the throne, the person standing beside him will not simply be a royal wife. She will be the future queen, a partner who will help shape how the British monarchy operates in the 21st century. After all the figures worth billions of dollars, the quiet personnel decisions, and the debates surrounding historic estates, the most important question still remains: what direction will the future of the British monarchy take? What is unfolding inside the royal property system is not merely a story about real estate or business contracts. It is also a sign that a generational transition is taking place step by step, moving from an older model of power toward a new way of operating. For many decades, under the leadership of Prince Charles in earlier years, the network surrounding the Duchy of Cornwall and many royal activities was built upon long-standing personal relationships. This model is quite familiar within the British aristocracy, where trust and personal loyalty often play a central role in decisions about cooperation. However, when William assumed control of the Duchy of Cornwall, many observers noticed that his approach appeared somewhat different. Instead of maintaining the entire existing system, he began reviewing contracts, partners, and even relationships that had existed for many years. These changes surprised a number of people, particularly because they touched individuals who had close connections with members of Queen Camilla's family. Yet for many analysts, this was not a personal move. They believe William is attempting to shape a new model of governance for the assets belonging to the heir to the throne, one in which transparency and efficiency are placed at the forefront. Another detail that has recently attracted considerable attention is Camilla's decision regarding her private residence, Ray Mill House. This property has long been considered the most important personal residence she maintains outside the royal palaces. Her reported consideration of selling or restructuring the ownership of this home has led some observers to wonder whether she may be preparing for changes in the future. In a context where control of major estates such as Sandringham and Balmoral will ultimately pass to William, the long-term living arrangements of other members of the royal family have also become a subject of increasing discussion. All of these factors point to a fairly clear reality. The British royal family is entering a period of transition. The generation represented by Charles reflects a more traditional model in which personal and family networks hold a central role. By contrast, the generation of William and Catherine appears to be moving toward a more streamlined system, where decisions are evaluated more strongly on the basis of efficiency and accountability. As British society increasingly demands transparency from public institutions, the monarchy must also adapt in order to maintain public support. This requires not only financial reforms, but also a new approach to power and responsibility. Many commentators believe that William understands this clearly and is attempting to lay the groundwork for his future reign through cautious yet visible changes. In the end, the story of ending a contract or reshaping a network of partners may appear to be only a small detail within a much larger picture. Yet those small details reveal how a new generation of leadership is beginning to reshape the system it will eventually inherit. Thank you for following this journey into the inner workings of power behind the British monarchy. If you are interested in the lesser-known stories about the figures who stand behind the throne, do not forget to subscribe so you will not miss the next analysis. And what do you think about William's decision to end the contract with the sister of Queen Camilla? Share your thoughts in the comments section. Camilla Parker Bowles has spent almost her entire life stepping out of the shadows of the third person onto the throne, bathed in light. But right now, behind the cold stone walls of Buckingham Palace, the Queen Consort is experiencing the darkest and most suffocating days since placing that crown on her head. If you think that Camilla's biggest threat right now is Prince William tightening the grip on massive financial resources, you are mistaken. A true earthquake is silently forming, coming from an alliance no one could have expected. A perfect trap has been set by the deadly combination of two women, Princess Anne, who holds the most authoritative royal bloodline and iron discipline of the monarchy, and Princess Catherine, the untouchable symbol of soft power, who is completely manipulating the hearts of the British public. According to insider sources, this unprecedented handshake does not stem from current petty power struggles. It is much deeper, colder, and more historical. It is a meticulously planned campaign, step by step, to avenge a name that passed away nearly 30 years ago, a ghost that Camilla thought she had buried forever, Princess Diana. In this bloodless war for the throne, who do you think holds the true manipulative power behind the closed doors of Buckingham Palace today? Please comment number 1 if you think it is Princess Catherine with power from the public, or comment number 2 if you believe in the ironclad traditional strength of Princess Anne. But to understand why two women from two generations, with two completely opposite personalities, have joined hands to form a pincer movement, we must go back to an invisible moment that the press completely missed. If Prince William is holding the most brutal financial sword, then Princess Catherine and Princess Anne are sharpening an invisible weapon that carries a psychological lethality 10,000 times deeper. To clearly understand this grip, we need to look back at William's preemptive strike. When Queen Elizabeth II passed away, William immediately inherited the Duchy of Cornwall. Do not let this deeply historical name fool you. This is not an ordinary piece of farmland, but in fact a massive royal real estate conglomerate and investment fund worth up to 1.2 billion British pounds, equivalent to about 38 trillion Vietnamese dong. Every year, this money-printing machine generates £30 million in net profit. The fatal point here is, William currently has 100% independent control over this immense fortune without needing any approval from King Charles. And the first move of the newly appointed Crown Prince, he silently crossed out the name of Annabel Elliot, Camilla's biological sister, from the duchy's payroll, ending 20 years of the Parker Bowles family, siphoning off lucrative contracts under King Charles. A cold message of power. William will use money to clean up the octopus tentacles that Camilla has planted in the palace. But ladies and gentlemen, the pain of financial deprivation is only the tip of the iceberg. In the world of royalty, money can buy luxury, but it absolutely cannot buy symbolic power. You may have your salary cut, but you are still the queen consort. However, what will happen if even that title of queen consort is turned into a joke, a redundant existence? That is exactly when the alliance between Princess Catherine and Princess Anne steps in. They are shifting the battlefield from financial power to a much bloodier front, soft power, and the manipulation of public image. To understand why Catherine dares to stand up and take these bold steps, completely ignoring the authority of her mother-in-law, we must look at the cold numbers that do not lie. In a constitutional monarchy, the throne survives thanks to the consensus and affection of the people. According to the most reputable public opinion polls in the UK right now, Princess Catherine's approval rating is always steady at over 76%. She is not only the most beloved royal member, but is truly playing the role of the only lifebuoy keeping the monarchy ship from sinking amid surrounding scandals. Meanwhile, let us look back at Camilla. Despite tens of millions of pounds being poured by the palace into whitewashing PR campaigns over the past 2 decades, despite her officially wearing the noble crown, Camilla's approval rating still constantly struggles below 40%. That overwhelming 76% figure is Catherine's most powerful death exemption card. It grants her an ultimate privilege. No one in Buckingham Palace, including King Charles, dares to publicly confront or displease her. King Charles, at the age of 76 and facing serious illness, understands too well the fragile boundary of power. Touching Catherine right now means igniting an angry uprising from public opinion, and he cannot let the dynasty fall just to protect his wife's ego. Camilla is also aware of this bitter truth. She knows she is in a weak position, but she absolutely did not expect Catherine to choose to join hands with the most fearsome and principled woman in the royal family, Princess Anne. The formation of this alliance did not take place through loud statements in the press, but was established in breathtakingly silent moments behind the exquisitely carved doors of the palace. High-level insider sources have whispered to each other about a recent landmark internal meeting. The subject of the meeting was the reallocation of budgets and hundreds of royal patronages left vacant after the late Queen passed away. In the royal family, charity funds are not just about doing good deeds. They are territories, places where members consolidate their symbolic power. At that majestic oak meeting table, Camilla confidently put forward a historically manipulative proposal. She wanted to take over the largest charity funds in the fields of mental health care and protecting homeless children. Anyone knowledgeable about royal history immediately recognized the true intention. Those are exactly the core areas that once made up the name, influence, and legacy of the late Princess Diana. This is a sophisticated move by Camilla, aimed at gradually erasing the image of the ex-wife from the public mind and replacing it with the image of a current queen consort full of compassion. However, the atmosphere in the meeting room suddenly froze when Princess Catherine spoke up. Since her health incidents, Catherine is no longer a royal daughter-in-law who always tries to be humble to please everyone. She returned with a spirit of steel. In a calm, soft tone but with words as sharp as a razor, Catherine bluntly rejected Camilla's proposal. She presented convincing figures, showing that these funds should be handed over to the younger generation, specifically her and William, to reach modern audiences. But the fatal blow lies in the final sentence. Catherine gently emphasized that this arrangement is to fully protect the original vision and sacred legacy of the previous Princess of Wales. The phrase, "previous Princess of Wales," echoed through the meeting room like an invisible slap. It was direct, ruthless, reminding Camilla of her true position, a permanent replacement living under the shadow of Diana. Camilla blushed, preparing to speak up in refutation, using the authority of a queen consort to silence her daughter-in-law. But at that very moment, another powerful sound rang out to block all her hopes. It was Princess Anne. The woman who is famous for her stoic, cold personality, never showing partisanship with anyone, now publicly directed a sharp, cold gaze at Camilla and nodded in agreement with Catherine. In the steely tone of a traditional gatekeeper, Anne cited the rules of the royal archives and the continuity of history to completely reject Camilla's argument. Anne's words were not merely administrative, it was an absolute veto coming from the pure royal bloodline. That instantaneous combined force carried the weight of both the present, the public support from Catherine, and the past, the guarantee from Anne's original lineage. Camilla sat there, stunned among the royal faces. The two women at opposite ends of the meeting table had accidentally, or intentionally, formed an unbreakable fortress wall. That was the moment Camilla bitterly realized. The battle to protect her crown was standing on the edge of the abyss. She is being besieged not by noisy opponents on the street, but by the most powerful women right in her own home. If William's financial cut decisions take place in the darkness of accounting meeting rooms, then the front commanded by Princess Catherine is bathed in the brilliant light of state banquets. There, the weapons drawn are not contracts or firing orders, but silks, brocades, and sparkling diamonds. But do not let that beauty fool you. In the language of royalty, fashion and jewelry are the sharpest diplomatic language, and in Catherine's hands right now, they have turned into a poisoned dagger aimed straight at Camilla's fragile self-esteem. To clearly see this sharpness, we need to understand the spectacular transformation in the psychology of the Princess of Wales. The press used to spend countless ink and paper to describe Catherine as a gentle daughter-in-law, a woman who always tries to keep peace, the one playing the role of a bridge, mending all rifts in the royal family. She used to be careful in every step, every look, so as not to overshadow her husband's stepmother. But ladies and gentlemen, that woman no longer exists. Since the serious health incident earlier this year, when facing the boundary between life and death and harsh treatments, Catherine has returned with a true spirit of steel. Fire tests gold, adversity tests strength, and the illness has forged the princess into a warrior without any leniency left. She realized a cruel truth. Her humility did not bring respect from Camilla. It only created an opportunity for the queen consort's faction to overpower. Realizing her invaluable time and position, Catherine's survival marked the end of the people-pleasing era. She no longer bothers with playing a supporting role to give up the stage for Camilla to shine. The gloves have come off, and the symbolic battle officially begins. Imagine the scene of a state banquet at Buckingham Palace. Camilla, in her capacity as queen consort, steps into the grand banquet hall, carrying on her head the most massive tiaras from the collection of the late Queen Elizabeth II. She adorns herself in expensive gowns, trying to cling to the physical weight of the crown to prove her legitimacy and supreme authority. But all those efforts instantly crumble to dust the moment Princess Catherine appears. Without the need for anything too flashy, Catherine simply gently placed the lover's knot tiara on her updo, a brilliant iconic piece of jewelry once associated with both the youth and tears of Princess Diana. On her ears are the South Sea pearl earrings, and on her neck is the legendary sapphire pendant. Every step Catherine takes, every blink, Every radiant smile of hers, under the crystal chandeliers, is a direct, ruthless, and profound psychological attack aimed straight at Camilla. To the public, it is a delicate tribute, but to Camilla, it is a psychological torture. Sitting on the highest chair in the banquet room, what Camilla sees is not her beautiful daughter-in-law, but the ghost of Diana being reborn perfectly, more gorgeously and proudly than ever. Diana is no longer here, but her legacy, her smile, and the jewelry carrying her soul are sitting proudly on the succeeding princess, shining right before the eyes of the woman who destroyed her happiness years ago. Catherine does not need to utter a single word of criticism. She just needs to wear Diana's clothes, smile, and let the deep insecurity in Camilla's heart eat away at herself. That is a masterstroke of psychological manipulation that no lawyer or crisis management expert can intervene in. But this weapon is not only personally lethal, its true destructive power lies in shocking media numbers. Let us talk about PR value, the true measure of power in the digital age. Over the past 20 years, King Charles and top British media advisors have burned tens of millions of pounds on PR campaigns, documentaries, and sponsored articles just to salvage a little public sympathy for Camilla, to transform her from the most hated woman in Britain into an acceptable queen consort. However, that entire massive PR project, built with money and time, was completely flattened in just 24 hours by a single photo of Catherine. Global media data analysts have pointed out a bitter truth. When Catherine appears with an item reminiscent of Diana, that photo immediately covers every front page, from London, New York, to Tokyo. The search volume, engagement level, and viral value it creates are equivalent to tens of millions of pounds in global advertising money in just one night. The world does not discuss Queen Consort Camilla's speech. They just go crazy for the Kate effect blending with the Diana nostalgia. The algorithm of every social network, the lens of every paparazzi all worship Catherine. A brutal truth exposed before the palace. No matter how hard Camilla tries to rise, she will forever be buried under the massive symbolic power of a daughter-in-law carrying the legacy of the ex-wife. Camilla's lifelong PR effort completely lost to Catherine's single moment of smiling while wearing a tiara. In this bloodless war, Catherine has proven that she not only inherits the title of her mother-in-law, but she also inherits an ultimate weapon, the love of humanity. And she uses that love to imprison Camilla in utter helplessness. While Princess Catherine shines brilliantly in the front hall to attract all eyes and the worship of the world with the sparkling light of soft power, deep in the silent, colder, and darker corridors of the palace, another front is being laid out. There are no public smiles there, no camera lenses, only the suffocating silence of absolute power. That front is governed by a woman dubbed the enforcer of the dynasty, Princess Anne, the Princess Royal. If one had to point out the only person in the entire British royal family who knows no fear, that person is definitely Anne. She carries the purest royal bloodline, possesses the highest noble title for women in the royal family, and is the only person who dares to look King Charles straight in the eye to say no. They grew up together. She knows all the weaknesses, all the sentimentality, and even the most disastrous mistakes of her brother. For that reason, the royal power of Charles cannot intimidate Anne. And of course, to someone who does not even fear a king, the position of a queen consort labeled as the one who came later, like Camilla, has absolutely no weight in her eyes. But Princess Anne's most terrifying weapon does not lie in her cold attitude, but in the key to power she holds, the royal archives at Windsor Castle. This is not an ordinary library with dusty books. This is the Pandora's box of Buckingham Palace. This place keeps all the naked truths, unpublished handwritten letters, private diaries, and the most brutal internal meeting minutes recording every royal upheaval throughout the 80s and 90s. That was the darkest period. The broken marriage of Charles and Diana, the sneaky late-night calls of Camillagate, Diana's ignored tears of resentment, and how the royal machine once ruthlessly covered up the mistakes of the heir to the throne. That entire tearful history lies in Anne's hands. The motive of Princess Anne in this war is very clear: protecting historical truth. In recent years, with Charles ascending the throne, Camilla's massive PR team has been working at full capacity to carry out a large-scale historical whitewashing campaign. They want to rewrite the story, turning Camilla from a third person who destroyed the happiness of a family into a true love, a resigned victim, a silent hero who saved the life of the king. They want to bury Diana's image into the past as a beautiful but unstable memory. But Anne says no. Even though during their lifetime Anne and Diana had personality differences, Anne is a person who worships truth and duty. She refuses to let the history of the family, the legacy of the monarchy, be bent and distorted just to serve Camilla's vanity and whitewashing ambition. As the gatekeeper, Anne uses her supreme access to the archives to block any attempt by the palace to rewrite history. She keeps those records intact, as a cold, sharp reminder hovering over Camilla's head. The past is still there, and we will never forget. However, Anne's punishment for Camilla does not just stop at preserving faded papers. It is materialized by a ruthless weapon named royal protocol. In the royal world, where you stand, the car you sit in, the row of seats you are placed in at Westminster Abbey, is the most accurate measure of your power and existence. When Camilla became queen consort, the Parker Bowles maternal family, including stepchildren, Tom, Laura, and relatives, assumed that they automatically became part of the new aristocratic class, enjoying VIP privileges at all national events. That is when the enforcer Anne takes action. With a thorough understanding down to every comma in the hundreds of years old royal rulebook, Anne begins a bloodless purge. She cites strict rules on bloodline and line of succession to mercilessly demote all members of the Parker Bowles family. Imagine the ultimate humiliation of Camilla when at major state events, her biological son and daughter are crossed off the royal reception list, stripped of their passes to VIP areas hidden behind the scenes. Instead of being seated in the front rows next to the royal family as they thought, the Parker Bowles family is coldly pushed back by Anne to the fourth and fifth rows, sitting hidden behind Queen Elizabeth's distant cousins. They are not allowed to appear on the Buckingham Palace balcony, nor use the royal motorcade. Anne has used the very laws of the dynasty to unmask them, turning them back into nothing more than commoners right in the reign where their mother is queen consort. Anne's blade is sharp in that it is completely legal. Camilla cannot scream, cannot run, crying to denounce this to King Charles, because Anne did not break the law. She is merely executing the law with extreme precision and emotionlessness. How can a queen consort complain when the Princess Royal is only protecting centuries-old traditional values? The ruthlessness of Anne lies in her deliberateness. She does not kick the family of Camilla out of the palace immediately. She lets them come, then slowly strips away every bit of their dignity before the witnessing eyes of hundreds of other aristocrats. Every backward seating arrangement, every VIP door slamming in front of Tom Parker Bowles, is a splash of cold water straight into the family ambitions of Camilla, reminding her that she may sleep in the bed of the king, but her bloodline will forever have no right to merge into the flow of this dynasty. This historical and ceremonial isolation by Princess Anne is actually just a protective shield, a perfect diversionary tactic to create conditions for a much more brutal war that Princess Catherine is silently conducting on another front, the front of the future. If Anne uses rules to imprison Camilla in an unwhitewashable past, Catherine is using her strategic vision to completely eliminate the presence of the queen consort in the coming decades of the dynasty. In the royal world, the throne and the crown are merely jewelry of the present. True power lies in who shapes the next generation and dominates the charitable legacy of the nation. And in this endgame, Catherine is demonstrating a sharp, cold political mind, perfectly camouflaged under the soothing exterior of a benevolent princess. The first move of Catherine is reshaping the entire charitable network of the royal family. In the British royal family, doing charity is not an idle job of handing out gifts. It is the ultimate means to exercise soft political power and build national loyalty. Right after Queen Elizabeth II passed away, a massive power vacuum opened up. Hundreds of charities needed a new patron. Camilla, in her capacity as queen consort, ambitiously wanted to take over the most core areas to build the image of the mother of the nation. But she was a long step behind Catherine. With the unspoken backing of Anne in royal councils, Catherine silently and fiercely took over the most foundational areas of society: early childhood development and mental health. This is not a random choice. Anyone with a deep insight into history must be startled to realize that these are exactly the core areas that Princess Diana once used to change the face of the royal family. If in the past Diana hugged HIV/AIDS patients and walked through minefields to pull the royal family closer to the most genuine pains of humanity, today Catherine uses mental health and children to do the same thing. By monopolizing these two heavy and healing fields, Catherine not only perfectly inherits the legacy of her mother-in-law, but also turns all the charitable efforts of Camilla into bland performances. And here, we must talk about a shocking number, a naked truth about the division of power behind closed doors. Since the year 2022, more than 400 royal patronages have been reallocated. The press paints this as a fair division, but in reality, it is a paper coup directed by Anne and Catherine. They have skillfully coordinated, using reasons of generational suitability and global connection capacity to gather all the most prestigious funds, national and international iconic organizations with profound influence into the hands of their faction. So what is left for Queen Consort Camilla? Superficial, hollow, and localized areas. Camilla is assigned to cut the ribbon at local horse racing clubs, small-scale animal lover societies, or little-known art exhibitions. She wears the highest crown, but holds the weakest block of symbolic power. Catherine has succeeded in turning Camilla into a queen consort in name only on the national map of influence. However, the pinnacle in the strategy of Catherine, and also the strongest motivation pushing her to participate in this war, does not lie in charity funds. It lies in the protective instinct of a mother. The most precious asset, the most ultimate weapon that Catherine possesses, is her three heirs: Prince George, the future king, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. Whoever controls these three children holds the entire lifeblood of the monarchy for the next 50 years. When Camilla ascended the throne, the Parker Bowles maternal family had illusions of a future where Camilla's biological grandchildren would run around the palace, play and establish a bond with George, Charlotte, and Louis. They wanted to create a patchwork extended family to completely legitimize the presence of the Parker Bowles bloodline in the flow of royal history. But Catherine, with the coldness of a mother lion protecting her cubs, said no, never. She established an impenetrable steel boundary around the three children, using the excuse of wanting her children to have a normal, private childhood free from media scrutiny. Catherine took full control of their personal schedules, guest lists at birthday parties, and private family vacations at Anmer Hall. Camilla's faction was completely blocked at the threshold. Camilla's grandchildren never have the opportunity to appear in the close circle of friends of the future kings and queens. For events where Camilla's presence is mandatory, Catherine teaches her children how to behave properly according to royal protocol standards: polite, respectful, but completely keeping a distance, and without the intimacy of blood relations. Camilla is allowed to have balcony photos together, but she is permanently denied the intimacy of a grandmother. Catherine wants to ensure that the future King George will grow up with memories of his biological grandmother Diana through stories, and will only remember Camilla as his grandfather's second wife, nothing more, nothing less. She eliminates all efforts to plant the influence of Camilla's faction in the minds of the heirs, keeping the future dynasty pure from the remnants of a wrongful affair in the past. Through a combination of strategies to acquire the charitable legacy and the ruthless protection of maternal love, Catherine has completely shattered the Parker Bowles family's dream of extending their octopus tentacles into the future. Amidst the tightening siege of the two most powerful women in the royal family, a man who should have stepped up to take charge of the situation, raising the flag of authority to protect his wife, chose to withdraw into the shadows. That man is King Charles III. If this dynasty is a chessboard, then King Charles is currently trapped in the most ruthless and suffocating checkmate position. There are no explosive outbursts of anger, no steel orders issued, but only a deep sorrow and the ultimate helplessness of a person realizing he cannot fight the karma he himself created. At the age of 76, a time when a man should be enjoying the leisure of his twilight years, Charles has to bend his back to bear the weight of the crown while facing arduous battles with his health. The vicious disease announced earlier the year has eroded not only the physical strength but also the fighting will of the monarch. In the long, quiet nights at Sandringham, King Charles understands better than anyone his precarious situation. He is the king, but in reality, his throne is being supported by two pillars that he absolutely cannot tear down: the public adoration for Catherine and the diligent, absolutely loyal operation of Princess Anne. King Charles needs Catherine like a soldier needs oxygen. He knows full well how fragile the survival of the monarchy in this 21st century is. Just one public relations mistake, and the wave of anti-royal sentiment will be waiting to swallow everything. And who is standing out to shield those waves? It is Catherine. Her smile, her resilience after severe illness, and the image of a perfect mother of the future are the most solid shield protecting Charles' throne. If he dared to speak out and reprimand Catherine to protect Camilla, he would instantly ignite a media riot. The public would tear him and Camilla apart once again, exactly the way they did in the 90s when Princess Diana collapsed. Touching Catherine means Charles signs his own death warrant for the support of the people. On the other hand, King Charles also cannot order Princess Anne to stop. Anne is the anchor of tradition, the one who shoulders a massive workload, the embodiment of the iron discipline values left by the late Queen Elizabeth II. More importantly, Charles carries a deep, unspoken guilt. He knows very well why his sister and daughter-in-law are cold and isolate Camilla. The root cause is none other than his past affair. How can a father look his son and daughter-in-law straight in the eye, asking them to respect the woman who contributed to ruining their childhood? How can a brother order his sister to stop protecting the legacy of their late sister-in-law, Diana, when he himself created that tragedy? Charles cannot. His silence and helplessness are not cowardice, but the ultimate resignation of a person being swallowed by the past. And when the only protector, King Charles, has his hands and feet locked, that is also when Queen Consort Camilla must face the most terrifying darkness of her life alone. Try putting yourself in Camilla's shoes. You will feel an extreme bewilderment, a chilling sensation running down your spine. She spent 2 grueling decades enduring the axes of public opinion, step by step climbing the ladder of fame. Finally, she placed the crown of the Queen Consort of the United Kingdom on her head. She thought she had won. But no, the collapse never comes from a loud explosion or a fiery argument. It comes from a deadly silence. Camilla is being legally, elegantly stripped of power without a single drop of blood falling. Those are the cold social smiles of Catherine. Those are the guest lists legitimately trimmed by Anne. That is the invisible coldness from the servants when they realize who the true master of the future is. She realizes the crown on her head is just a hollow piece of jewelry. Because true power, the power that controls the dynasty and dictates history, has been stripped from her hands. Camilla's psychological panic does not just stop at emotions, it has turned into desperate defensive actions. Recently, royal insiders have been buzzing about Camilla secretly selling Ray Mill House, the private estate in Wiltshire, which used to be her safest refuge since before marrying King Charles. Why does a queen consort, living in the luxury of Buckingham Palace, have to hastily sell her personal refuge without any fanfare? The answer is full of the taste of bitterness. She is preparing for a scenario of having nothing left. Camilla is smart enough to read the writing on the wall. King Charles is old and weak. The day he closes his eyes and passes away is no longer a distant fiction. And the moment King Charles passes away, Camilla's countdown clock also officially rings. Instantly, all palaces from Buckingham, Windsor to Balmoral will change owners, falling under the absolute control of King William. The keys will be revoked, power will be transferred. At that time, Camilla will be stripped of her current halo, becoming a Queen Dowager, a respectful title but completely lacking real power. She will have to live the last years of her life, relying on the pity and handouts from her husband's stepson, William, who has never forgiven her, and a daughter-in-law, Catherine, who has sworn to protect Diana's legacy to her last breath. She sells the house, perhaps because she understands that, in the near future, there will be nowhere in this vast empire that truly considers her the master. A slow, elegant, and suffocatingly ruthless punishment, a whole life of fighting, only to stand at the highest peak. Camilla Parker Bowles has to live in constant fear, watching her power slip through her fingers without being able to utter half a word of complaint. As the curtain of this calculating royal play gradually closes, we are forced to reconsider the entire situation with a deeper and more philosophical lens. What is happening behind the doors of Buckingham Palace right now is absolutely not a crude eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth revenge. If Princess Catherine and Princess Anne simply wanted to humiliate Queen Consort Camilla in public, they have thousands of sophisticated ways to create humiliating media troubles. But in the upper-class world of the royal family, that is a low-class move. Loud animosity is only for the weak who lack courage. True royal power always operates quietly and profoundly. The move that the two most powerful women in the royal family are making is a masterpiece of psychological political art. They are not destroying, but they are executing a revenge at the highest level, building a legacy. With Catherine's ultimate intelligence and subtlety combined with Anna's toughness and extreme protection of traditional rules, they are turning the ultimate pains of the 90s into a solid foundation for the future of the dynasty. Camilla Parker Bowles may have won a personal battle that lasted more than 3 decades. Admittedly, she won Charles' heart, won the legitimate step into Westminster Abbey, won the sparkling crown and the most powerful position next to the king. However, Camilla's most ironic tragedy is that she won a love affair, but permanently lost the war for the soul of the dynasty. She acquired the glorious shell of royal power, but was stripped of all true dignity. The monarchy of the future bears no trace or legacy of Camilla. It is being shaped entirely by the ideals, tolerance, and symbolic power of a single woman, Princess Diana. Diana permanently stopped at the fateful Paris Tunnel in 1997. She did not have the chance to see this dynasty change, did not see her son grow up to become a brave future king, and could not witness with her own eyes the outstanding daughter-in-law bearing her title shine. But her ideals have never been buried. It is radiantly present in every look of Catherine, in every historical rule that Anne preserves, and it is slowly, quietly, swallowing Camilla's self-esteem every day. For an ambitious woman like Camilla, this punishment is more painful than any verdict. There will be no darkness colder and more terrifying than having to live the rest of her life at the pinnacle of fame, but permanently suffocating under the massive, immortal shadow of a woman she once firmly believed she had completely defeated 30 years ago. The gilded wrought-iron gates of Buckingham Palace are always kept tightly shut. This is not only to protect those of noble blood from the outside world, but more importantly, to lock the ghosts of the past within. Hello, I am the chronicler of the hidden corners of the royal court. Having observed this empire for decades, I once naively believed that I had understood every dirty scheme hidden behind the bright red velvet curtains. I believed that every cruelest, most tearful secret had finally been laid to rest alongside the English rose on the misty island of Althorpe. But we were all wrong. Right now, the 1,000-year-old foundations of the greatest monarchy in the world are cracking. It is not being shaken by a tabloid, an aggressive investigative journalist, or the whiny memoir of a royal who turned his back on his family. This earthquake was triggered by the very steel pillar of the dynasty, Princess Anne, the most loyal and principled woman of all. Everything began on a gray morning at the Gatcombe estate. The rotting plywood of a portrait from the 70s accidentally cracked open. Hidden deep in the core of the sturdy oak frame was a rusted microcassette tape, lying silent for 3 long decades, carrying a verdict from beyond the grave. A chilling recording exposed the most cruel psychological warfare conspiracy. And more horrifyingly, it was spoken by the very woman who now wears the queen consort crown. Today, we will step into the eye of the storm. We will see how Princess Anne faced the heinous crime of her own brother, and witness the moment the future King William collapsed completely upon hearing that cold-blooded voice. Before we open this historical tape, I want to ask you one thing. If this cruel truth is exposed, do you believe the crown will finally fall? Comment number 1. Or will the powerful royal machinery cover it up successfully? Comment number 2. Gatcombe Park Estate on a Tuesday morning passed by without anything special. Unlike the noisy luxury and marble hallways of Buckingham Palace, Gatcombe has always been like this: practical, calm, and completely devoid of the constantly flashing camera lenses of the media. To Princess Anne, this is a safe shelter, a working farm, and not a stage to showcase power. She has always preferred that rustic and direct nature, far away from the PR machine that is always spinning in London. That morning, in Anne's private office, an art restoration expert was carefully cleaning an oil portrait from the 70s. It was a painting of Princess Diana from her youth, an old gift that had been forgotten in a storage corner. Restoration work is inherently boring and repetitive. The worker used a thin, specialized metal spatula to gently remove the oak plywood behind the painting frame to replace it. Then a cracking sound rang out. It was not the sound of rotting wood breaking in two. It was the sound of a hidden mechanical latch just popping open. The worker's hand froze in midair. The wood panel slid out, revealing a tiny rectangular hollow space, carved extremely carefully and intentionally right in the core of the solid wood block. Anne stepped closer, her eyebrows slightly furrowed. She immediately realized this was not a coincidence. She turned to the worker and signaled for him to leave the room. A brief, decisive order, without needing explanation. The worker nodded quickly, gathered his tools, stepped outside, and shut the door tightly. Now, only the princess remained in the room. The air was so quiet that she could hear the rhythm of her own breathing. She reached into that finely carved small hollow and took out an object. It was an old microcassette tape, the tiny type of tape people used for hidden handheld recorders in the 90s. It was neatly wrapped in a yellowed piece of paper, tied on the outside with a thin thread. Anne slowly opened the paper. The familiar blue seal of Kensington Palace was printed at the top of the page. But it was the hurried, handwritten lines in black ink below that stunned her. It was Diana's handwriting. For Anne, because you always choose the truth, no matter how cruel it is. Let the children know when they are old enough to understand. Anne stood still. The public still calls her the steel woman of the royal family. She has never wavered before media crises, family scandals, or even a kidnapping attempt directed at herself. But at this moment, holding the thin piece of paper in her hand, she felt a terrible weight. Why did Diana choose her? Diana knew very well the royal system was always divided into factions and full of leakers. Giving this to Charles's side would be walking into a trap. Giving it to the press would mean it would be immediately suppressed by court injunctions from royal lawyers. Diana chose Anne because she was smart enough to understand that, no matter how cold and principled Anne was, she was the only one who valued the truth and the survival of the crown more than covering up for the individuals wearing it. That message was not a plea for pity. It was a final pragmatic move. Diana handed this ticking time bomb to the only person in the system tough enough not to be bribed or threatened. As Anne's fingers glided over the rough plastic surface of the tape, her mind turned back to the worst years of the 90s. She remembered the years 1995 and 1996 very clearly. At that time, the newspapers were filled every day with articles implying that the Princess of Wales had lost her mind. Buckingham Palace aides constantly whispered to the media that Diana was suffering from severe paranoia. They told reporters the story of how she often crawled under tables, flipped over carpets, and dismantled electrical outlets at Kensington because she stubbornly believed that British intelligence, MI5, was wiretapping her. The whole world, and even the royal system at the time, believed that Diana was falling into an unstable mental state. Most people looked at her with pity mixed with annoyance. But at this very moment, staring at the tape in her hand, Anne realized a truth that would make anyone's skin crawl. Diana was never paranoid. She was completely sane and knew exactly what was happening. The truth is that Diana knew she was being watched, but she did not sit still to play the victim. During those days pushed to the brink, the woman that the press labeled as a weak and unstable person had silently played a deadly game with the entire power machine of England. She had found the tiny wiretapping devices hidden in her bedroom herself. But instead of smashing them or screaming in outrage to the press, she hid them away. And then, she used the system's own weapon to trap them back. She secretly placed that device into Prince Charles's work folder before he left for the weekend. This tape was not a dying wish or a tearful diary page. It was the ultimate insurance policy. It was the only weapon that a mother who was isolated and stripped of all power had created to gain the upper hand, ensuring that no one could take her two sons away from her. Let us pause for a moment and think about this number. 10,500 days. That is correct. For 10,500 days, nearly 30 years, this truth had been buried alive in silence inside an oak frame. Throughout those 30 years, the false story about a weak, paranoid princess continued to be spread and written into history books. Throughout those 30 years, another woman had walked proudly through the Buckingham gates, placed the queen consort crown on her head, and smiled and waved at the crowd on the balcony like a winner. And most cruelly, throughout those 30 years, Prince William and Prince Harry had to grow up, force smiles, comply, and shake hands with those who had planned to destroy their mother without ever knowing that the whole truth had been lying just a few miles away from them, hidden in their own aunt's house. It had been there, waiting patiently for 10,500 days until there was a hand brave enough to pull it out of the darkness. However, that rusted tape did not only contain the cries of a desperate woman. When Princess Anne's finger touched the play button, she did not expect that she was about to open the door to hell, where a symphony of the devil had been arranged many decades ago. The space in the Gatcombe Park office seemed to freeze. Princess Anne sat motionless on the leather armchair, her eyes fixed on the old dictaphone placed on the table. The fingers that were usually only accustomed to holding horse reins firmly now hesitated slightly when pressing the play button. A heavy mechanical click sounded, tearing through the silence of the room. Immediately after, the past did not appear in faded images, but in the ghostly hissing of the magnetic tape that had slept under the dust of time for 3 decades. From the tiny speaker, the time machine suddenly dragged the listener back to 1996, plunging straight into the darkest center of power of the dynasty, the private Highgrove mansion. Upper-class crime rarely begins with loud shouting or threats. It always hides under the guise of luxury and silence. The first sound echoing from the tape was the sound of a solid oak door slamming shut, locking out all prying eyes of the servants. Right after that, a very familiar sound, familiar to the point of being hair-raising to anyone who had ever stepped into royal living rooms, the sound of ice cubes clinking against the sides of expensive crystal glasses. That leisurely sound painted a scene that was perfect to the point of being chilling. They were drinking. They were relaxing, sipping high-end liquid while deciding the fate of a human being. Has the staff in the West Wing retreated yet? A female voice spoke up. It was absolutely not the elegant, trembling, and vulnerable voice of Diana. It was a deep, husky voice, characteristic of long-term smoking habits, carrying a level of authority so high that it was condescending. Anyone living in the United Kingdom could immediately recognize that voice. It was Camilla. They have all left. It is only us. A male voice replied. A bit of hesitation, a flat tone, completely lacking the decisiveness of a leader. It was Charles, the future King of England, hiding in his own mansion to conspire with his mistress. Princess Anne leaned back in her chair, a suffocating feeling rising in her chest. The Devil's Symphony officially began. The thing that made the Iron Princess boil with anger was not the fact that they were having an affair. Infidelity in the royal court is a story that is too old, a secret that everyone implicitly understands. The thing that disgusted her was the coldness to the point of cruelty in the way these two people discussed destroying the spirit of the sister-in-law who had once called her sister. The current media strategy is failing. Camilla's voice rang out, sharp and rhythmic, like a general reviewing troops. The public still pities her. We need to be more